Erica?
Hi. Hello. Hi. Thank you all for your really informative presentations. They drew me to two questions across the board. One, which is sort of connections, making connections thematically and making connections in human resources. And Saida, you actually prompted the question I was about to ask, which is tying business and human rights work to anti-corruption work. And how do you see the areas that you're looking at tying into anti-corruption standards, anti-money laundering standards, and the connection between corruption and human rights abuse? And then sort of the human resources connection question is, there was a couple of mentions of sort of the young but bursting at the seams NGO growth in the region, and it seems like in a lot of international advocacy contexts, the UN, the Ruggie process, there's an ongoing process on regulating the conduct of private security contractors. There's a real absence of NGOs from the regions that are most impacted by the companies. And so I wonder what the panel thinks about making the connections between groups that are on the ground and really close to the abuses, and maybe groups outside of those borders that have a lot of sort of experience thematically in this area, and trying to sort of build capacity and work together.
Well, I guess just sort of as an overview response with respect to NGOs, one thing to keep in mind is that the paucity or absence of NGOs in the Middle East is not accidental, it's deliberate. There are a host of laws in virtually every country in the Middle East and North Africa that basically makes it impossible for NGOs to really be NGOs. Actually, very happily, Tunisia, under its newly established government, passed the first of the most progressive laws in the region on the establishment of NGOs. But everywhere else in the region, NGOs either aren't allowed to exist at all, or they are so heavily monitored and regulated by the governments that they are not free to operate independently. And the last thing that the Egyptian parliament was doing before it was disbanded by the military authorities, who've since been replaced happily, was to draft a new NGO law. So certainly in the transitional countries, there's opportunity for new NGOs to come into being that can do more work that challenges the status quo. But in fact, in many countries in the region, NGO laws are getting worse and more restrictive, including even in Israel, where there are new laws that are restricting the funding of NGOs depending on their political activism.
Well, yes, I agree with Sarah, but not fully. I mean, the NGOs are very weak in the MENA region. They lack funding. They have many problems, but they are increasing. And I think, especially after the Arab Spring, even in the countries that didn't witness revolutions, they have many more NGOs than before. We don't have NGOs on business and human rights. This is correct. They didn't make the link until now. In terms of the question about anti-corruption, as far as I know, for example, for Transparency International, there are only like 3-4 chapters in the whole MENA region. One of them is only an expert, and after we left, we don't have anybody in Jordan. There aren't NGOs working on fighting corruption. It's only journalists going into the media and blaming the government for corruption, but not real serious work on this issue. So linking both of them together, if you already don't have the NGOs working on the issue, I think it's going to be a bit difficult on this issue or any other issue, but especially on corruption and transparency, it's a bit difficult. for censorship reasons, for media reasons, and for the NGOs, the lack of NGOs that work on the subject.
Yes. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I'm Gloria Kins. I'm a UN correspondent, and we cover all these issues. And I'm here, I'm not Irish, but I'm a worshiper of Mrs. Robinson. However, she's my, she's not a movie star, she's what attracts me. So, but I'm interested in Mr. Naimi because I've been involved for many years in the tourist industry, and I understand his point of view. But the problem is, we have to be able to say, don't do it here to the investors, because all the officials, all of the different conferences say are inquiring, can we invest in Egypt? There almost must be, along with the negative, where can you invest? And we are with you, we'll encourage it, and we'll work with you, with the major companies who are in the tourist business, because this is the lifeblood of Egypt, tourism. That and textiles, which also can hurt the environment at times. So I think there has to be, this is bad, but this can be done. And at the same time, it's a form of public relations. As to the problems, the media are unfortunately always pointing at corruption in the Middle East and that whole part of the world. But take a look at the United States. We have senators, members of our council. We have people here on welfare. It's just as corrupt here. But the media at least are pointing it out and have the right to say, take a look at it. So here, a part of it is where it cannot perhaps hurt the government. It can also be pointed out where there's corruption in any way, where in some way one can say a little corruption's all right, but don't take the whole cake. But especially here.
I'm going to pause for a minute and give a minute for a translation and see if Mr. Nagy would like to respond. And meanwhile, I would be expecting other people to be standing up to the mic. I knew that there were some folks who were dying to ask questions.
Okay, he's ready.
اوكي الحقيقه النقطه اللي كانت بتقال دلوقتي حوالين ان في استثمارات بتيجي سواء في السياحه او سواء في غيرها من الاعمال، وان ازاي بعد ما بتيجي وبتبدا تشتغل او بتبدا تخش او كذا، فبيتقال ما هو انتوا بتواجهوهم، طب ما تقولوا لهم الاول يشتغلوا فين ولا يعملوا فين ولا يعملوا. طبعا قولوا لهم الاول المفروض دي مش راجعه علينا احنا كمنظمات مجتمع مدني، ولكن نقول لهم الاول دي راجعه لان دي مسؤوليه الحكومه والخطط المسبقه اللي بتحطها علشان تبقى عارفه هتعمل هنا ايه وهتعمل في المكان ده ايه وهتعمل في المكان ده ايه. وفي الحقيقه ان الكلام ده بيتلاقى مع قصه الفساد اللي كان في كلام عنه من شويه، ان بالفعل حكايه تحديد الاماكن دي فين هيتعمل شغل وفين هيتعمل كذا، وانه عايزين الحته دي عشان بالنسبه للمستثمر هتبقى احسن بالنسبه له في الشغل بتاعه فنديها له، لأن في فساد جاري في الموضوع. فهنا دي مش شغلة المنظمات المجتمع المدني، ده جانب. الجانب الثاني
Mr. Naki was saying he sees your point that when investments come to Egypt and usually NGOs try to lobby against it, it's not because they want to lobby against it. The major issue is that governments put the plans. So governments usually has the sites, knows where these things can be done, where these projects should be done, or where they cannot be, or they shouldn't be done. So, and this intersects a bit with the issue of corruption that was a bit discussed. So the issue is that we as NGOs usually react to what happens. because if the government doesn't have a plan, or if it just changed the plan to please the investor because of corruption and because so on and so forth, the only way we have to do is to face this, because it is a mix between corruption and poor planning of this.
من هنا اللي انا عايز اقوله ان قصه، وزي ما قلت من شويه وانا بتكلم في الكلمه اللي قلتها، قلت ان الشركات كمان الدوليه او شركات متعدده الجنسيه بتيجي اصلا مصر او بتيجي غيرها من دول، بالذات دول العالم الثالث، بتيجي لان في ضعف في القوانين، بتيجي لان ما فيش قوه او ما فيش حسم في تطبيق حتى القوانين الضعيفه اللي موجوده، بتيجي لان في فساد. ان ضمن الحاجات اللي بتخليهم يجوا ان بالفعل هذه البلاد موجود فيها فساد، وبالتالي فده بيساعدها على انها تعمل. يعني لما اجي اقول النهارده ان شركه زي بي بي الانجليزيه لما تيجي وتبقى بتعمل اتفاقيه بينها وبين الحكومه المصريه وبتحدد مكان تروح تقعد فيه وتحط لها مبنى من غير ما يبقى فيه دراسه تقييم اثر بيئي، طب احنا يعني اهو في تحالف موجود، فساد مع شركات جايه من بره. هي دي القصه اللي هي من الضروري ان احنا لازم هنواجهها في كل الاوقات.
Usually when international companies come, they come because we have poor laws, weak law enforcement, and corruption. For them it's attractive. They can come, for example, when BP comes and decide that they want to invest in this sector, in this place, and set up themselves, they come because they know that they can benefit from the corruption that is there. And we as NGOs, we need to fight against that.
Sir, I believe that the NGOs should get together and fight this type of corruption and tell people where they can invest. Because as a correspondent, and over the years, talking to World Health, and the NGOs and everyone else, I keep saying, show people a list of what can be done, because the officials here, after a while, when people say, well, I read, and even sponsored by Egypt, by the NGOs, by every organization, you could have a wonderful tourist colony here, you could have more ships visiting here or there, or more cruises, whatever it is. There must be a legitimate way. It's needed for the economic development of Egypt, because in the end, if it's only the worry of environment, the people are going to starve, and there are going to be more Arab Springs, and the people don't even know why anymore. They need direction. But we've been dealing with diplomats. I'm a diplomatic editor for years. And any consul general who are in charge of economic development, right away they say tourism. But they're not telling us where, and maybe that's where the NGO should be cooperating with the government development official representatives. There must be a way.
I want to answer first before you.
نعم.
Yeah, of course. I just want to tell you that in the laws, in international laws, corruption is permitted from industrial countries to developing countries. So you can give a bribe from an American company doing business in Egypt. You are allowed in international law to give a bribe to invest in a certain country. And this is what many NGOs have been fighting about, especially with the UNCAC Treaty and with the Transparency International, but it is allowed. So it's not only the mistake of the Egypt or developing countries, it's also the mistake of the whole world, the Europe and the states who are doing business with the developing countries.
أنا عايز بس أقول على حاجة برضه أنا قلتها قبل كده، هي موضوع الحق في المعلومة وتداول المعلومات في المجتمعات بتاعتنا سواء مصر أو غيرها في المنطقة. إن بالفعل في إشكالية كبيرة إن مفيش إتاحة للمعلومات، وإن المعلومات عادة اللي بتطلع عن أي موضوع بتطلع معلومتين أو 3 أو 4. يعني لما نقول حتى في عدد السكان أو عدد مثلا نقول عدد المسيحيين عندنا قد إيه، أو نقول إن الأراضي الصالحة علشان يتعمل فيها مشاريع فين، أو نقول أي معلومة، مفيش مفيش إتاحة للمعلومات عندنا تسمح لنا. طبعا أنا مع الأستاذة اللي بتتكلم في إن من الضروري إن احنا نقول للناس، وده اللي احنا بنحاول نعمله، سواء نعمله لوحدنا نعمله بالمشاركة مع منظمات دولية، إن نحاول نحط قاعدة معلومات نقدر من خلالها إن احنا نعمل بالفعل العملية اللي هي بتتكلم عنها. لكن ده فعلا شيء شديد الصعوبة جدا احنا بنواجهه كمنظمات أهلية.
What he's trying to say is that there is importance, he wants to emphasize the issue of transparency and access to information. He says that many times they cannot do all the environmental impact assessment and know where can this be done. And I mean, they are an NGO and they cannot do all this. So the main fact is that there is no information available, and when something starts, they try to make sure that the environmental impact assessment is done, and then if it is not done, it becomes fishy for them. But they don't have the capacity practically to do the information gathering because there are NGOs. But he approves what you're saying in that people will need to know where they can invest and not.